Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real-time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Today's guest has been an ART provider for two Major League Baseball teams, the Philadelphia Phillies and the Toronto Blue Jays. He's a former collegiate baseball player, an avid athlete. He is dedicated to athletes and understanding the needs to be an active individual. Please welcome the founder of Potomac Physical Medicine, Dr. Matt Fontaine. Welcome, Matt.
Greg, thanks so much for having me. Honored.
It's a great pleasure. Well, as you know, we love talking about endurance and the endurance mindset. So the question I have to ask you, Matt, is tell me how your endurance mindset has impacted your life unexpectedly.
Sure. It's a great question. For me, I think that the biggest thing that I found interesting was the struggle with keeping on the path of training and discipline and just kind of going from one race to another and struggling with the ability to kind of stop along the way and enjoy those small wins without just constantly chasing that next Everest. That's probably the biggest thing that I found to be a surprise. Short of the fact of, as you get into it and you start looking at people that went before you and kind of awe of, how does someone do a half iron or half marathon until you start actually doing the training, get a few sprint distances under your belt, and you realize pretty quickly just how much reserve the body has, for going through and doing that endurance training, whatever the distance is. The ability of the brain, if you let it, to just stay out of the way and let the body just continue to grind is pretty impressive.
I love it. There's so many little breadcrumbs there to jump into. But before we do that, you just talked about taking the time to enjoy the small wins when you're pursuing these longer endeavors. Can you go a little bit deeper in what you mean by that?
I would say I've struggled with that. For me, it's constantly like looking at the next event. And I always love having a race. In the game, a lot of people are going to have one or two, maybe three A races for the year. For a lot of people, it's just one. If they're at a high level, Ironman or Ultra. I think the challenge for me is constantly just looking at what's next instead of what I've come to realize. With age, obviously perspective changes. I think it's less about the achievement and collecting those T-shirts and putting those, races on your resume, and more about the process and just the day to day, because I think that's really what endurance is all about. It's not so much clicking off those major achievements, but it's the day to day discipline to do the training, to train when you don't want to, but you have to. And I think probably I'm not different from anybody. I think a lot of people probably struggle with that, but the people who continue to enjoy, doing endurance training, they've been able to push through where other people will kind of say, hey, I've had enough, So the surprising thing, I think, is just the capacity reserves that you have if you just continue to grind and not let that mind get in the way of, hey, I'm done, I'm fatigued, and just keep pushing. But the dichotomy with that is the ability to be able to sit back and look at the accomplishments you've done over the last 5-10 years and say, wow, that's really cool. I did a lot of really cool stuff. I know for me, I struggle with enjoying it in real time. So something I still struggle with today.
It's a tremendous struggle, especially when you don't want to get that day's commitment out the door or on the bike. How have you seen your athletes get through that? And I'll stop that question. I guess follow up. But how do your athletes and even yourself get through that struggle when you wake up that morning or that afternoon and you should do X, but you want to do Y? Walk us through that mental training.
Well, I've noticed for sure there's a difference between the patient athlete who has a big race coming up, or they have several smaller races throughout the year. Those races on the calendar or events, whatever they are, everything from trail runs to Ironmans to Ultras to fill in the blank, Spartan, Tough Mudder, you name it. They tend to be held accountable to that calendar. So it helps with their consistency, I think. I'm sure they suffer the same. I don't want to, but looking at that calendar saying, hey, that race is 2 months away, or, 6 weeks away, whatever it is, kind of forces you to just be beholden to your training schedule. So I think that's one difference I see between the athletes who have races throughout the year and just the person who's just trying to get fit to maybe run a 5K. It's easier for them, I think, to fall off than somebody who's, spent whatever it is to register for a Ironman these days. It's a lot of money invested, your bike, your equipment, right? Your coaches, all that stuff. I think that goes a long way to keeping people disciplined. And it attracts this certain type of mindset to get into that game to begin with. I always talk with patients who, they see the Ironman pictures in my office, and they'll bring it up. Oh, I'd love to do a triathlon one day. I'm like, do one. Do a sprint. Everybody's got a sprint in them. Start there. See where that takes you. You're going to know whether you're hooked or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, having that race on the calendar makes a huge difference in the motivation, because you can't just keep procrastinating, right? Like if you don't have the race in the calendar and you miss a week, then you can just postpone the destination by a week. But if you do have it on the calendar, then you've got to double down and figure it out. Matt, you mentioned the capacity of your brain and our ability to accomplish and to endure. How have you seen that endurance capacity translate in other aspects of your life?
Well, I think, for me, and I always tell this to patients, I think you go through phases, and there was definitely a phase where my training was all about, trying to check those boxes and do the events that I thought were cool to chase, and whether it be playing sports as a kid growing up. Now, this phase of my life, all the training I do is for life. I want to be able to do the things I want to do. And the cool thing about physical training is doing those arduous things that people don't like to do. I mean, obviously it builds mental toughness. So hopefully it's making you more resilient along the way. So I think that's a good thing as well. And, what I always tell people is this is the only body you're going to get. It's got to carry you for your entire life. You got to take care of it. And I think, there's so much neuroscience out there now between the mind-body connection, and people are really starting to get in tune with things that I think were intuitive 20, 30 years ago in small sectors. And a lot of things are starting to bleed out into the regular society, whether it be things that they take from how we train special ops soldiers and the things that they've been able to be exposed to with sports psychology and neuroscience and how the brain works. I think that guide to mental toughness really, I don't think there's a better way to push through that than physical challenge and training, hard training, and just consistency over time.
Certainly. So you just mentioned you're in this phase of training for life. Is it a different approach to your training now than you were in a different phase of your life, or you see between like a professional athlete and somebody middle-aged who just wants to be around for their kids long-term?
Yeah, I think, obviously as you get a little bit older, you have to be a lot more strategic in the gym because injuries pile up. You've got decades of hard miles on the body. So it's difficult to put your ego in check and want to still be doing the things you did, 20 years ago. For me though, it's more come along the lines of function more than anything, and I think whether it be, all the years I spent doing cross training, even when I was doing triathlon, I still kept a pretty good strength and conditioning regimen. And that was probably the biggest challenge I faced when I was doing a lot of triathlon, was having to dial back time in the gym doing what I love, which is strength and conditioning, and doing more of the road work and the pool work. But it's become more now about, a lot of stability training, mobility, things that are going to keep me, number one, injury proof, and number two, able to perform at a high level. Because you really have to look long term. Once you start getting into your 40s, I think you can still do a lot of the things you used to do. It just takes longer to warm up. So warm up becomes a big priority. The other thing for me is having, over 2 decades as a sports physician, I've seen a lot of injuries, and I've had a lot of the injuries that I treat. So that gives me kind of a unique perspective. Sometimes I wish I didn't know what I know. I'd love to be able to just get out there and ground and pound and say, it's not that bad, But having been put down enough by a lot of injuries and just seeing other people as well, that's always in the back of my mind now, kind of like, hey, maybe if I push it this week, maybe next week I can't train because I'm injured. So the big take home there is trying to just live to fight another day. And on days when you're supposed to train, and if you don't feel like you have it, just get out there and do some movement, go through the motions, and just listen to your body. That's the biggest thing, rather than pushing when your body's telling you not to.
Yeah. Or even the alternative of not doing it. Just go out there and
Yep.
do something, like change the duration, change the intensity, but make sure you still stick to the schedule, stick to what you've committed to.
Yeah, I mean, people have heard people talk about this, like, hey, set out your running shoes the night before. I mean, if you prep that, you're more than likely to do it. I mean, it's definitely different if you're unmotivated, because these days I don't want to work out most days. I just don't. I don't enjoy it the way I used to. It becomes a little bit more of a chore. So in that aspect, just getting out and going through the motions, yeah, a lot of times those workouts are going to turn out to be some of your better workouts, because once you get the body in movement, you're moving. But more of the training for life is more on the injury prevention, and maybe tracking things like heart rate variability, where you kind of know, hey, my body's showing signs, biometrically, that I might be breaking down. I think I got to go easy today, even though I feel like I can train hard. Let me just kind of listen to that. So it's more of kind of struggling with, when do I need to put the restrictor plate on, and when can I just let my body just reckless abandon?
I find, so about a year and a half ago, I've committed to doing either running or walking a mile every day. And I'm just intentional about it. And it could be snowing, raining outside. I'll go do it or stick it on the treadmill. And I find that having that small habit on a daily basis leads into me actually looking forward to my training schedule and doing the strength training that I don't want to do. Any other habits that you have, or you see your athletes have, or people coming into your office, that either is sort of a sign of something dangerous coming, or something that helps them sort of prevail through, their training and their racing?
Yeah, I think one of the overarching things that I see in most of my patients is they're not doing enough stability work. And what I mean by that is core training, the kind of core training that none of us like: plank, bridging, those kind of things. And they're not doing enough stability work for their rotator cuff. And they're definitely not doing enough mobility work. We're all pressed for time, and I think a lot of people they're just not prioritizing it. And so that's the canary in the coal mine. I mean, that's an injury waiting to happen. So one of the things that I try to get people to realize is, look, for me, every morning I'm up early. 20 minutes of mobility every morning is kind of a non-negotiable. I don't count it as part of my workout. It's just habitual. And so I'm accruing that mobility day in and day out over time. And the gains that you can make with that are substantial in terms of injury prevention and just overall performance. You move better. If you think about like triathlon, it's a pretty linear sport. It's very sagittal. It's easy to get caught. I mean, it's just run, swim, bike, everything in the, sagittal plane. And so if people aren't training their core, they're susceptible to injury. I think that's where some of the functional training can come in. Even if it's just 2 short little workouts a week, upper, lower body, do some kettlebell stuff. I think every endurance athlete can benefit from that.
You just mentioned your 20 minutes in the morning for mobility. Are you doing the same set of stretches, exercises, warm up, or are you mixing it up? And then is that prescribed, or are you waking up in the morning and just kind of picking and choosing what you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, one of the benefits of being a sports doc is I'm prescribing these exercises out on a regular basis. So, but I'm a big fan of following people online. There's a ton of good information out there if you have a good filter. So I'm constantly looking at stuff. The cool thing about functional training is that it's constantly evolving, and there's some really creative things that are being done with, elastic bands and how to move and stretch. So there are certain areas that I'll prioritize on a given day. It might be a hip focused day. There's certain things that I constantly do day in and day out. One of them is rolling my arch in my feet with a lacrosse peanut, because I've had plantar fasciitis in both feet multiple times. Anybody who's had it can attest. They know it's horrible. And it's a good way to hedge against preventing it from coming back if you've had it before, and also preventing just getting it in general. So that's a staple for me. I've had bad shoulders, either from baseball or swimming. And so rotator cuff stability work is usually in the mix. So there are some staples that I keep in the mix, but I do try to mix it up. And it's just, 20 minutes. Usually it looks like starting with the rolling the arch of my feet with a lacrosse peanut. Then I'll go right into the foam roller, rolling up and down on my back just to maintain some spinal flexibility. And then from there, I'm going to get in. I'm usually going to do some hip mobility, kind of whatever I feel like the body needs that day.
You just mentioned a term that I've never heard before. What is a lacrosse peanut?
Cool. I get that a lot from patients. It's 2 lacrosse balls taped together.
Okay.
We've been
I've got
using
one of
them.
those.
Yeah, we've been using them in the gym for, I would say 2 decades now. Probably back in the day, it was tennis balls taped together with duct tape. And now it's just 2 lax balls, tape them together super tight. They're great for doing shoulder girdle work, hip, the outer part of the hip, the foot. It's a versatile tool. I keep mine in my laptop bag when I travel. It doubles as a low back support when I get on the airplane, goes right in between my lower back. 1 ball on either side, cinch the seatbelt down really good and tight. That really helps to kind of maintain a good neutral posture. I picked that up from Kelly Starrett, who's a PT. He started Mobility WOD, and now it's called the Ready State. He's one of the pioneers that has put the mobility practice on the map for the masses. So for anybody out there who's interested, Kelly Starrett, and he's written a couple books. One is called The Supple Leopard. I think his new book out is called Born to Move. Hopefully I'm getting that right.
We'll do the
great resource to look into.
Yeah, we'll definitely do the research there and put those on our show notes. Thank you for those. That's really helpful. Any other trends that you've really dug your teeth into over the last 5-10 years that or maybe that are coming around the corner that you see that somebody else in the audience might not see?
From a physical training standpoint or injury prevention? Yeah. Yeah, I think the mobility thing is a must-have, in my opinion. I think the second thing I would say is core training is a must-have, especially in the transverse plane. And so a lot of athletes out there, I think, just get into a rut of doing what they're doing. And I'm not talking specifically the pro athlete, because at that level, they have enough resources around them where these people are dialed in on the number one priority is injury prevention. They got to keep guys and girls on the field playing because they're being paid. But it's the, collegiate athlete and everybody else in between that's just kind of so focused on doing what they're doing. I think that people are starting to tune in and make taking care of their physical body a priority, because they realize that they're just breaking down without it. So, for me, regular chiropractic care is a must have for getting your joints aligned, because as we kind of know now, if you're trying to prioritize movement but you don't have good joint alignment, nothing else is going to fall into place. So mobility and alignment go hand in hand. So chiropractic is a great way to augment what you're doing in and out of the gym. And there's just so much stuff coming out now that's kind of getting mainstream. There's so much science out there to be had online if people are looking for it. Triathletes are notorious for tracking things, right? Whether it's a watt meter on their bike or, they're tracking a lot of stuff. So I would imagine a lot of them are tracking heart rate variability. And for people who don't know what that is, it's just it's a measure of the balance between your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. And in a perfect world, when the body's in homeostasis, we have a good balance between those two. So tracking your heart rate variability, whether it's with an Oura ring or different apps that you can get on the phone. I have one that's Elite HRV. It has a chest lead. I also have an Oura ring that I use, but it allows you to track your heart rate variability day in and day out. And the cool thing about that is it will tell you usually ahead of time whether your body's getting run down or not. So it's a good way to kind of get in front of, hey, I might be getting sick. Maybe my body's fighting something. Maybe today's not a good day to go hard, kind of thing. And so if I can get in front of an injury or an illness and kind of dial back, give my body enough recovery time, then maybe I can put off being sick for a week as opposed to just maybe 1 or 2 days I'm down and out and I bounce back and recover. So I think overall, the biggest thing I would say is I don't think people are out there overtraining, but I do think they're under recovered because I see it every day in my office, you know.
Yeah, go a little bit deeper there. What do you mean by under recovered? What would be an illustration?
Yeah. So when we're talking about training, there's a stimulus stress to the body, right? And if that stress is below a certain level, the body can adapt to that. And so that adaptation time is different for everybody. But let's just say it's somewhere between 12 and 72 hours given on a given workout. If it's a power lifter that's doing a max rep deadlift or squat, their recovery time on that is probably a week, meaning they're not going to go heavy again for a week, potentially, depending on what they're doing in their training cycle. Elite power lifters, they're programming their 12-month calendars programmed out into mesocycles and everything's broken down. 4-week chunks, 2 to 3 months, that kind of thing. So, but the biggest thing that I see is we're training day in and day out, and especially people who are doing a lot of HIIT training, high intensity interval training, they're constantly redlining it. And if you're digging yourself further and further into a hole and you're not adapting, we don't ever see this super compensation curve, because what should happen after we work out, stressor, the body gets broken down, hopefully a little bit, and then I super compensate over the next 12 to 24 hours. That's dependent on a lot of things, your genetics, sleep, hydration, your nutrition, all of those factors. So if I fully recover, got good sleep, I'm hydrated well, my nutrition's on point, and I recover before the next workout, well, I continue to adapt positively. But what I see is people are just constantly under recovering from yesterday's workout, and within 24 hours, they're back at it again, crushing the gym. Whether that's at a CrossFit gym, whether it's running, fill in the blank. And that can be true for a lot of our youth athletics as well. Playing on 6 different travel teams. I see that a lot, whether it's soccer or fill in the blank, swimming, baseball. Kids today are on multiple teams. And so you've got to factor in how many games per week is that with practices. And while being a youth athlete, they're very resilient because they have a lot of adaptive reserves. We do see kids breaking down as well.
Certainly. And I've got 2 young girls, one who's starting crew this week. And to your point, there's just a constant hammering, water, rowing, erging, and bringing in this concept of recovery, sleep, nutrition, all that. And it's a tough conversation with a 14-year-old, right? I mean, they don't really want to listen to you.
Well, it's tough too, even with the coach, because a lot of coaches have the mentality of, hey, there's somebody out there who's training right now to beat you, and if you're not training hard enough, at some point you're going to meet that person, and they're going to win. Right. So there's always that mentality in sports, and it's even trickling down into the high school and below high school level. So I think one of the challenges is for coaches, how do you have, your practice and competition schedule up high enough to be competitive, but also allow these kids to recover? And that's difficult when you have a kid, a student athlete who's on different teams. Maybe these coaches aren't communicating with each other. So it's one of the things that I've seen over the last 20 years that's gotten increasingly more of a challenge is the demands we're putting on these athletes at a younger age. I just don't see a lot of recovery time unless they're, and you got a lot of kids that are playing single sport all year round. So they're not getting the break of soccer, basketball, baseball, or fill in the blank. That can be a challenge as well, because those multi-sport athletes, they did have a certain amount of built-in recovery because of different sports. Now it's 12 months a year, swimming, competitive all the time, for the competitive swimmer. And that takes its toll on the body.
You lightened up a light bulb for me with respect to multi-sports and how they overlap. As a parent, who should we be talking to about the holistic view of our kids' athletic program, right? So my daughter's on the year-round swim team. So that's 3-4 days a week, meets on weekends. Now we got crew. Sometimes it's golf. Sometimes it's this. But we kind of let the coaches sort of figure it all out. But to your point, they don't talk. And so as a parent, who should I be talking to about hey, here are all the activities going on in her life.
Yeah.
When should we be bringing in recovery? What signs should we be looking out for burnout? Help us with that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think recovery just it needs to be implemented, even if it's getting them used to using a foam roller and, do they have a lacrosse peanut that they can use to try to ease out some of the stiffness in their shoulder? And, I know for my patients, I have a built out YouTube channel that we use, but one of the things that I think is not happening at a large enough level is sports med docs getting out into the community and giving talks to these sport teams, club organizations. I get asked from time to time, hey, would you come in and talk? Gladly. I think if more sports physicians got out there and were talking with these coaches, just at least getting the conversation started about, here are some of the things you need to be looking for in your athlete, because it's easy to miss it for, maybe they got a lackadaisical attitude and they're not grinding it out. They're not a hustler, when in reality is kids today, it's different from when I was coming up. You had time to recover. Now it might be they're injured, and what looks like somebody who's just not putting out might be just breakdown. And it's a challenge for that coach to know, because, you do want to support your athletes. You also want to be there for them, but you want to hold them accountable. I think it's a conversation that I don't think is happening on a grand scale. And I think that needs to change over time if we're going to see this amount of volume at that age be sustainable. So I think for a lot of parents, it's even just becoming aware of the fact that this is happening. I think a good book that I would recommend for parents out there, it's called Triumph. It was written by David Epstein. He's I believe still is a Sports Illustrated writer, editor, but he wrote a book about how specialists triumph in a generalist world, I think was the subtitle. And he starts the book off by comparing Tiger Woods and Roger Federer, two top athletes in their field. Tiger Woods started golf at age 2-3. Federer didn't start playing competitive tennis till I think 14. He was a multi-sport athlete. And the rest of the book kind of follows in line of, just kind of, we're asking these kids today to pick, hey, you show some promise. This might be your sport. You got to pick. It's a double-edged sword. Yes, you're going to be more competitive that way, but I think you're more injury prone, and there's consequences to that. So
that's really insightful, Matt. Thank you. Shifting gears a little bit, tell us about your childhood, where you grew up, how you got into sports medicine. Give us a little bit more of your career background.
Sure. I was born and raised in New England. Swam competitively from probably age 6, 7. Swimming, baseball as a young kid, pond hockey. Never good enough to play organized hockey, sadly. And then was lucky enough to walk on and play a few years collegiate baseball. And I got into sports chiropractic. Originally, I wanted to go to school for physical therapy. Highly competitive coming out of high school back in the day. And fortunately for me, my advisor said, hey, you're probably not going to get into school for PT. It's highly competitive. You just don't have the grades for it. And I went into a pre-medical option. So it was a 3-in-1, allowed you to go any route you wanted to. And I ended up getting on the chiropractic path and got into sports. It was a natural path for me, just growing up being an athlete. We were lucky to have an athletic trainer my last year in high school. And I just kind of gravitated towards it. Always loved anatomy, loved the body. It's very interesting. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And then very early on in my professional career, I got hooked into working with the ART Ironman medical team. So covering Ironman events, working on the athletes there. And then was fortunate enough to work with some high level sports teams along the way. So
how did I'm curious about the sports teams, right? Is that something you apply for, or do they come to you? They just, somebody recommended from your office?
Sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
So fortunately for me, I was at a sports conference and met a couple key players that asked if I was local. I said yes. They invited me out, and kind of the rest is history. So I was very lucky there with one of the teams, a good friend of mine who played Major League Baseball for a few years, kind of knocked around in the minor leagues. Had a good friend of his who was a rehab coordinator for a team. I had been working on a few guys that just found me through the ART website. And so he made a couple phone calls on my behalf, and next thing you know, I was able to come in. So the cool thing about working at that level is you really get to put your skill set up. I mean, people got to get better at that level. So you're able to see cutting edge. The best practices in sports medicine at that time are going to be at the Olympic, pro, and collegiate level. And then you're able to kind of extrapolate that down to all the other patients that you're taking care of. So, and there's been chiropractors that have worked on the U.S. Olympic team. And so those docs have, a really invaluable insight into what sports medicine looks like at a pinnacle, where it's completely integrated and the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. Now in medicine, everything is very siloed, and, still you've got this doctor doesn't know what this doctor's doing. And at that level, there's a lot of communication, usually coordinated by the head athletic trainer, kind of the field general of everything. They know all the strength coaches. They know all the specialists that the players are seeing, and they're just getting the best care, and they have the best resources available to them. Mm. It's kind of like Disneyland. The real world hasn't caught up yet as far as healthcare goes. But, I think if we can look at how pro sports are handled from an integrative sense, we can make big roads in how we deliver healthcare to the masses, because that's what world-class healthcare really looks like. Real integration where you have every specialty represented and available and coordinated when appropriate.
And that analogy works with business too, right? You look at these major sports teams, any professional sports team, and they are much more efficiently run than most major businesses, right? You think about the coaching that goes on, the playmaking, the rule books, the systems, the processes, all that should be in business, and it tends not to be. We just tend to be running after it as fast as we can.
Exactly.
So going back to chiropractic care, Dr. Matt, who is an ideal client for you? I'll just leave it at that. Is there a type of person and what they're trying to achieve, or a background that sort of suits your methodology, suits your style more so than another individual?
I have a pretty wide spectrum of patients. I would say the common theme amongst all of them is they're active. Most of them are coming in usually because they've got some kind of an injury that they want to get past. I do have a lot of patients that find me because they're searching for a sports chiropractor. And then, they're active on all fronts: CrossFitters, ultra marathoners, triathlon, fill in the blank, right? Combative sports, everything from, swimming, soccer, baseball, those kinds of things. So it's very active. I think patients get out of it what they put in terms of, just like everything else, just being consistent. We try to give them the tools that they need from a homework perspective, because I always tell patients, you can't exercise your way out of an injury, and you can't fix an injury with exercise, but you can't fix an injury without it either. So exercise need to be systematic, progressive, and comprehensive, and we need to be able to scale exercises for that patient based on what they have going on. So we always look at their structural alignment, because that's king daddy of the fundamentals in terms of how the body's functioning. If you don't have good structural alignment, all the other things you're doing are going to have a minimal effect, and eventually you're going to succumb to more pain and inflammation and injury. So we try to prioritize that. I really focus on a lot of mobility work with my patients, and then we focus in on the areas that we're treating. If it's a shoulder, we're going to be shoulder centric on a lot of the things that we do. Everybody gets trained in how to properly train core stability, because everybody needs it. It's the number one thing I think we can work on for preventing low back pain, which is going to affect 80% or more of the population. So definitely a very active patient base. And the patients who come in motivated to get better, I always tell patients, chiropractic's great at pain reduction. We get pretty quick results with that, but that's not its sweet spot. Its sweet spot is really in performance based. It's a lifestyle. The patients that I see on a monthly basis who are coming in just to keep their body in tune and aligned, They have fewer injuries. They're able to, do more, run, lift, farther, stronger, faster, all that stuff.
Awesome. So before we hit record today, you mentioned a book, and I wasn't sure if you're writing a book or you're into something, or if you even wanted to have a platform to talk about it, but here's a chance, or I could fire up a different question.
Sure. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I've been writing a book since about April 2020. So right when COVID kicked off. It's called Only One Body. And really it's an owner's manual, kind of focused around the physical body. We do get into mind and mindset, but it's really a book to empower the reader to become their own advocate in the healthcare world. Because I see a lot of patients that just don't really understand how their body is built, how we're engineered as a physical chassis, how we work, how we break, why we break, and more importantly, what do we do to fix it? So the book's kind of centered around musculoskeletal medicine, how to build a healthcare team that's integrated, how to talk to your doctor, what kind of questions should you be asking when you go see your primary, how to know, should I go see an orthopedic? Who do I need to go see first? Who should be on my integrated healthcare team? And then it gets into a little bit of training, fuel recovery. And then the last part of the book, we get into mindset and longevity. I'm no longevity expert, but I've been following some really cool people over the last 6-7 years. A lot of what I do throughout the book is bring together a lot of subject matter experts, whether it be sleep experts, experts in longevity, strength and conditioning, human performance, movement, because I really want to expose the reader to those experts and say, hey, if you want more, here's where to go find it. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Hopefully we're launching this spring. It's been a long time coming. It's in the final process. We're doing last minute edits right now. So I would say March to May this year, hopefully.
That's awesome. Well, congrats. I'm looking forward to cracking open my first copy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, first, before we get to that, how can an audience member get in touch with you?
So my website's probably best way. A lot of information there. It's drmattfontaine.com. The book's got a resources page there. It's under the resources tab. Also have Instagram, same handle, Dr. Matt Fontaine. At IG, YouTube channel, same deal.
Awesome. And we'll include those links in our show notes for sure.
Cool.
Any parting words for our audience? Any words of wisdom?
I think the big thing for people that, are already endurance athletes themselves and just people who are looking to get into it is, that famous quote, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step, so just get out there, set some goals, and, prioritize your physical well-being, because if you're taking care of your body, a lot of other things are going to fall into place. And I don't mean to put the physical before the mental and emotional, because that's just as important. But, we can be doing a lot of things around sports psychology and everything else, but we've really got to have that physical chassis to carry us around. And so I think they both feed off each other. When you're healthy, fit physically, you're going to feel better mentally. And if you're doing some good mind prep and working on mindset, they both play off each other.
That's really helpful and eye-opening. So thank you for that. Matt, I've loved our conversation, and there's so many different angles we could have taken this, but I appreciate the importance of strength and mobility and the conversation we had around that. I am super looking forward to your book being released sometime this spring. I think there's going to be a lot of great content in those pages for us to digest. So audience members, if you like this show, please go down and click subscribe. Please follow Matt on his socials. Reach out to him if you've got any questions. We should spread this word to our greater community. So please share this show. Matt, again, it's been awesome having you on our podcast. You've been super insightful and inspiring. So thank you.
Greg, thanks so much. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate the invite for having me out.
My pleasure. Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits.